The Silicon Grimoire. A single spark jumped across the copper vein, but it did not behave like standard electricity. Instead of a chaotic flicker, the light crawled with intentionality, illuminating a series of jagged, angular carvings etched deep into the fiberglass substrate. These were not serial numbers or manufacturer logos. They were Uthark runes, ancient symbols of power, glowing with a faint, rhythmic violet hue as they channeled data through a motherboard that shouldn't have been able to support them. The laboratory was silent, save for the hum of the cooling fans, but the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the room itself were holding its breath. On the central workstation lay the prototype, a marvel of modern engineering merged with something much older. As the power levels reached critical capacity, the runes began to vibrate. The copper traces on the board turned from a dull metallic orange to a molten liquid gold, and for a split second, the air smelled of ozone and ancient pine forests. The digital display didn't show binary code, it showed a shimmering map of the stars as they appeared 10,000 years ago. For decades, the world believed that the advancement of technology was a linear path leading away from the mysticism of the past. Engineers traded parchment for silicon and incantations for algorithms. However, a secret discovery in a remote excavation site changed everything. Researchers found a series of metallic plates that functioned like modern semiconductors, but were etched with elder Futhark inscriptions. This discovery led to the creation of the Chronos circuit, the very board currently pulsing on the workbench. The integration process was not easy. Standard electricity often fried the runic pathways, leading to catastrophic hardware failure. It was only when the lead scientists realized that the runes were not passive components but active logical gates that the breakthrough occurred. In a traditional computer, a gate is either open or closed, represented by a 1 or a 0. In the runic circuit, the symbols acted as multi-dimensional switches, capable of holding states that defied traditional quantum logic. The rune Ansus, representing communication and divine inspiration, acted as the primary processor, while Isa, symbolizing ice and stillness, functioned as an absolute zero cooling mechanism. Observers watching the process noted that the board seemed to have a temperament. It did not just process data, it reacted to the environment. When the logic reached the complex paradox, the Thurisas rune would flare bright red, aggressively shattering the computational bottleneck through a method the engineers could only describe as brute force divination. It was as if the hardware possessed a form of ancestral consciousness, a ghost in the machine that predated the machine itself. The implications of this hybrid technology were staggering. If a motherboard could utilize the linguistic power of the ancients, the barrier between software and reality would begin to thin. Encryption would become unbreakable, protected not by math, but by metaphysical seals. Communication could occur instantaneously across any distance, guided by the same forces that the seafaring Norsemen believed governed the winds and tides. Yet there was an underlying fear among the research team. They were using a language they could transcribe, but not fully understand. As the sun began to set outside the high-tech facility, casting long shadows over the rows of servers, the prototype reached its final phase of the boot sequence. The copper lines grew brighter, the heat dissipating into a strange, cool mist. The runes were now scrolling across the board like liquid ink, leaping from one circuit path to another. They were no longer just static etchings. They were a living stream of information, dancing between the world of the physical and the world of the symbolic. The lead researcher leaned in, his face illuminated by the ethereal glow of the board. He watched as the rune Gebo, the symbol of the gift, centered itself on the main CPU housing. Suddenly, the monitors in the room went dark, replaced by a single stream of golden text that translated not into data points, but into a warning. The machine was communicating. It stated that knowledge without wisdom was a flame without a hearth. The board was not just a tool, it was a bridge, and something on the other side was starting to cross over. The experiment was a success, but the victory felt hollow. They had successfully married the ancient with the futuristic, but in doing so, they had opened a door that could not be easily shut. The silicon was no longer just sand and logic. It was a vessel for an old power that had been waiting for a medium fast enough to keep up with its thoughts. As the violet light faded into a steady, rhythmic pulse, the team realized that the future of technology might not lie in the stars, but in the forgotten whispers of the past, etched in copper and bound by the laws of a science that humanity was only beginning to rediscover. The Aether-Board sat still once more, but it was changed. The copper lines remained a slightly deeper shade of gold, and the runes, though dim, remained visible even without power. It was a silent testament to the fact that the greatest innovations are sometimes just echoes of a truth we once knew but chose to forget. The era of the digital shaman had begun.